What's good? It's Woog. We have a new champion at featherweight as Angelo Leo just knocked Luis Alberto Lopez, Venado Lopez. Leo knocks Lopez out in the 10th round. Whew. Look, I just got finished watching the Virgil Ortiz versus Bohachuk fight. And, I had to watch that on delay because last night I was at a Dodger game. My cousin is the hitting coach of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And so we had a lot of family come out, supporting him. And we got to go on the field at the end of the game. So I was at Chavez Ravine. That's the historic nickname of Dodger Stadium. So I was out there last night. I had to watch Bohachuk versus Ortiz on delay. So I did a video on that, just kind of a recap reaction. And then I watched Lopez defending his title for, I think that this was his fourth title defense against Angelo Leo, who you might remember had his only loss back at 122 a few years ago against Stephen Fulton. And this was an excellent fight. So we basically go from Bohachuk versus Ortiz, which I consider to be one of the fights of the year. I still kind of think Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk has that distinction on lock. But in terms of the other contenders, I look at Virgil versus Bohachuk as being one of those. And then as I'm watching Lopez versus Leo, I'm watching Leo box his butt off, counterpunching super effectively. I'm watching Lopez, go for those very unorthodox, chaotic home run shots where he's like pulling his head and throwing wild, wide shots and lunging in, everything that we've seen him do over the past several fights. And as I'm watching the fight play out, I'm also kind of unofficially scoring it. I had it 4-4 after 8 rounds. Like Leo, this was in his hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so look, I had him winning like 2 of the first 3 rounds. So he came out boxing well, and he wasn't, he wasn't bashful. He wasn't backing up too much against Lopez. He was actually moving in. When Lopez would come in with those bombs, Leo would be moving laterally. Lopez would lunge in. Leo would then step forward and counter punch with some nice shots. And then he would keep it in tight. And then there was a lot of clinching. There was a lot of infighting, very in close. Lopez was ripping Leo with these nasty uppercuts, bloodied his mouth up eventually. Both of these guys were taking a ton of shots. And look, in the 10th round, all of a sudden, Lopez gets blasted with a left hook that sends him splattering on the canvas, head hitting the mat, bouncing, and it was a 10 count. It wasn't one of those where he gets up and then he's standing up against the ropes and the ref jumps in. No, this was Leo dropping Lopez, Lopez looking up at the lights and laying there for like 6 seconds before he even starts to attempt to get up. Doesn't even come close to beating the 10 count. You see when they bring the stool in, Venado Lopez reaches out for the stool and he's still wobbly. He can't even steady himself while he's on his knees reaching out for the stool. He was in bad shape. I mean, he's okay apparently, but boy, that was a nasty shot. And look, I don't know why that particular shot was the one that sent him to the canvas, given all of the shots that he had taken. I don't know if this was an accumulation thing, because there were some like right hands that Leo was throwing that was blasting Venado Lopez. And, he rolls he's reactive. So he's moving with a lot of the punches. So you don't really know how much he's, absorbing the shot with his movement and how much he's just eating the punch. But it looked like there were several shots over the course of those first 9 rounds that were cleaner and maybe harder than the one that ultimately ended the fight. And it looked like if anybody was going to be weakening or waning, that it might be Angelo Leo because of the types of punches Lopez was hitting him with. Like, as Leo was winning as many, if not more rounds throughout like the first half of the fight, the question was, can Leo actually hurt Lopez? Because the idea is we believe Lopez can hurt Leo, and we know Leo is boxing really well. I mean, there were times where he was looking to tire. I mean, both of these guys looked tired in different times. And there were times where Lopez would move with the punch because he would like be protesting due to a borderline low blow. And he would be turning his whole head to where then he takes a shot near the back of the head because of how much Lopez is like turning around to look at the ref and turning his head and back on Leo. So this was a very interesting it was very action packed. It was a lot of back and forth. It was anybody's guess going into like the 10th round who was going to come out on top. But again, the idea was that if there was going to be like a sudden knockout, you would think that it would have been Lopez knocking Leo out, but it was not to be. Leo, again, rocketed Venado Lopez with that left hook, and that was case closed. And, you know, we've seen Lopez with his flaws over the years. And like, you know, Emmanuel Navarrete's got very distinct flaws where it's like, how does this guy get away with this? You know, but it's because their attributes that make them very good offensive fighters also kind of play into a defense where they're keeping their opponent guessing. It's just an onslaught of activity. They've got very different styles, but it's a chaotic pressure to where their defensive deficiencies are kind of masked by what they're doing offensively and how they're just conducting themselves in the ring. And so it was almost not a matter of if, but when Lopez would pay for his defensive flaws. And I mean, this was just one of those cases. You know how they show how Devin Haney was getting hit by that Ryan Garcia left hook where Haney's got a glove up, but it's not high enough. And I forgot who was pointing this out. It might have been Boxing Gems, but where Haney will jab and he calls it a bow and arrow, where since he's jabbing with this hand is going back, so you're not protecting yourself. You're naked in the chin area when you're jabbing because of how your shoulders are moving and you're guarded here. But once you jab, your chin is out here and your hand is back here. In the case of Lopez versus Leo, it was Lopez throwing, I think, a scooping left hand. And while he was throwing that shot, instead of having his glove here, he kind of had his glove here. That's not good enough. That's not protecting your chin. Leo threw that hook in that exact moment. And again, it was good night. So we've got a new featherweight champion, the new IBF featherweight champ, who, again, this was Venado's 4th title defense. That's not, you know, super common. I mean, we've seen a lot of, you know, fighters have several title defenses, but it's hard to take the next contender up, and to beat them all. Well, it's going to be interesting to see where Lopez goes from here because he's about 5'4". So I don't see him going up to 130 and having big success. I don't know if he tries to go for a different belt. I don't know if he tries to maybe fight Rafael Espinoza, the guy who beat Robesi Ramirez. But I mean, if he fights Espinoza's 6'1". Luis Lopez is 5'4". So I haven't even thought about what that would look like, style, and how that would play out in the ring. But, you know, Lopez is 30 years old. So he's not old, but he said that he wants to make enough money to be able to retire, spend the rest of his life with his family. I don't think he's made that type of money yet. And, you know, he didn't have any title unification fights, but it's going to be interesting to see if he gets right back in there, tries to get right back in a title mix. Cause again, Top Rank has 2 of the 4 champions right now. The other 2 champions are Ray Vargas, has the WBC belt. And then you've got Nick Ball, who just beat Raymond Ford on that Queensberry versus Matchroom 5-on-5. So yeah, look, this was a shocking knockout. And so, you know, I was saying that Virgil Ortiz versus Bohachuk is one of the fights of the year. This one between Venado and Leo, this was looking like a fight of the year contender. And this is certainly a knockout of the year contender. Shocking just to see Venado go down like that and his head bounce off the canvas, and just him, certain fighters, you see them hit the canvas and the way they hit the canvas, you know that they're not about to beat that 10 count. This looked like one of those knockouts. And again, it was an excellent fight leading up to the knockout. Leo showed a ton of heart, took a ton of big shots. Every time you started thinking, okay, maybe now the champ is going to seize control and start pulling away with this one, you saw Leo get right back to the jab, double, triple jabbing, moving, and getting right back to what was giving him success. But then you would see Venado answering that with those big lunging shots and those uppercuts. Very good fight, and it ended in spectacular knockout fashion. Props to Angelo Leo. A lot of times when you see a guy get to the mountaintop or, you know, a title opportunity and then he loses and then he's knocked down a few pegs, Leo won a few fights, you know, under the radar. He won like 4 or 5 fights after that loss to Stephen Fulton. One of those, you know, wins was against Eduardo Baez. So at 30 years old, I feel really happy for Angelo Leo, who just became a champion in front of his home crowd, knocking out the relatively long time IBF champion in Luis Alberto Lopez. So yeah, props to Leo. This was an excellent fight. Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. And who does Leo defend against next? Is, you know, Robesi Ramirez, who's also on Top Rank, is he going to get right back in the title mix? Let me know your thoughts on all that. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.